This GUMBANDS podcast is made possible by the Buell Foundation, serving southwestern Pennsylvania since 1927, and by listeners like you. Thank you.
4, 3.
Tom Roberts plays the piano. I first got in touch with him in the fall of 2017 when our QED Cooks host, Chris Fenimore, who plays the banjo, suggested that Tom might be available to compose some music for my upcoming series of programs called Nebby. Tom was willing and able. We recorded him in Studio B here at WQED, playing his compositions on the same Steinway grand piano that Johnny Costa played live for most episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Tom created music specifically for the first 2 Nebby programs. Then we ended up using those compositions in all 8 Nebby episodes, and in many other places. And we learned to love the guy. We were happy to get him for this episode of GUMBANDS, and we talked so much it ended up being a 2-part interview. We recorded both episodes on a beautiful sunny morning in April of 2023 on the ground floor of WQED.
We're speeding.
This is GUMBANDS 006, Tom Roberts Part 1.
All right, Frank, we're rolling. Rich, Cassidy, everybody good? So, Tom, I think I always want to start by, because I think these are questions you don't always ask your friends, even though we've been friends now for many years.
We've been friends for quite some time.
Where did you grow up? Where did you start?
I grew up in Swisshelm Park.
Oh, yeah?
Which is
sort of under the Commercial Street Bridge. And
yeah, we lived underneath in a little shack. No, we lived in Swisshelm Park, and that's where I grew up. And we used to play baseball on the slag dumps down there. There's lots of great stories about the slag dumps, which I think are now like expensive houses.
Yeah, but it's now what's the name of the development there? Somerset at Frick Park.
Probably. We used to. We discovered one year that you could go sled riding in the summer on the heaps of slag.
Ooh.
And you could, but you would use a piece of cardboard.
And you might die.
It was one of the most, it was one of the stupidest things I ever did in my entire life, because we figured, look, the slag, it goes down. So we took cardboard and climbed up to the top of the slag dump and started going down and picked up a lot of speed. And we didn't stop to think that the cardboard, we're going down metallic, very jagged, sharp pieces of metallic material that started shredding the cardboard. And we were going really fast at that point when the cardboard had given way. And then the jeans gave way.
And then the skin was there.
And then the skin gave way at that point. So it was not a happy thing. So, yeah, my childhood was kind of dark. So we'll just...
slag dumps are things that we don't think about that much anymore. I don't know that, but you used to... I mean, there's that one that is now Somerset at Frick Park. And then there was the big one over on 51 that became Century 3 Mall.
Yeah.
Century 3 Mall was built, I think, on part of that slag dump. But before that happened, I can remember a visitor. We were driving around, and this girl had come to visit from eastern Pennsylvania. And as we drove down 51, she saw the slag dump for the first time. And she said, "What is that, a volcano?" And I thought, that's excellent.
Very close, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's
my legs and buttocks felt it was a volcano when I was a child. So
Swisshelm Park, I think when I hear about Swisshelm Park, you often hear that a lot of cops live there. Your dad wasn't a cop, was he?
No, my dad was a mill hunky.
Okay.
In fact, my whole family worked in the mills, and it was kind of a dark childhood. It was a real rough neighborhood when I grew up there. Yeah, and it was not a happy time. But there was a good thing that occurred. I remember coming down to eat breakfast one morning when I was in 4th grade, and my mother said, Jack Bogut just played some. Jack Bogut has been playing something on the radio that I think you're going to really like. And it played.
And it was?
That was the year that the Sting came out and they played The Entertainer. And I heard it, and I was transformed.
Scott Joplin.
Scott Joplin. I heard that, and I was in a different time, and I was in a different place, and I became obsessed. I became obsessed with the sound. The sound really struck me in a very profound way. And so that summer, I had injured my leg, My grandparents lived across the street. They had a player piano. I had, I think I had messed up my knee or torn an Achilles tendon or done something bad to my knee. You and I both know about having knee injuries with the quadricep brothers. And part of the rehabilitation was pumping my grandmother's player piano.
Okay.
And my grandfather bought me the player piano roll of The Entertainer and also the real sheet music.
Okay.
I didn't know any better, so I just saw that and I looked at it. This is the truth. I'm much brighter than I look.
But
I'm sitting there and I'm pumping the thing and I'm looking at the sheet music and I'm watching the keys go down. I said, okay, that means that's this one and that's this one. And these, when they're stacked on top, that means you play them all together. I put my hands over top and I taught myself how to play the piano that summer. I'd get up in the morning, I'd walk across the street, learn the first part until they'd say, Tommy, it's time for lunch. I'd go up and I'd eat lunch and I'd go back down and I'd play the piano again. They say, Tommy, it's time for dinner. I'd go back up, I'd eat dinner, I'd go back down, and they say, Tommy, it's time for bed, and I'd go to bed. And that was an entire summer, and that's when I learned how to play the piano.
But I want to bounce back, because why did your mother know that you'd like The Entertainer?
I have no idea.
She wasn't a musician?
She was not.
Your dad at all? Music?
No.
You are a child of two non-musicians.
Yeah.
Who's built his whole life around music.
Yeah. Although, when I was in 8th grade, I was selling newspapers on the corner of Forbes and Murray with Stewie Weissman. We had all discovered girls at that point. Right. And you could stand there in the summer in 8th grade and watch the girls walk by. And that little newsstand was right in front of the Squirrel Hill Cafe, known as the Squirrel Cage.
Right.
And sometimes they'd see these two skinny little 8th graders and they would give us a hard time with all this money. And so two guys started watching over us to make sure nothing bad happened to us. One was a guy named Lenny. I won't tell you the nickname we had for him, but he was very funny. And then the other guy named Joe, we don't know if his last name was Boyd or if his name was Gaston, but he would just sit there with us and he would talk to us about various things. He was a very intelligent man. And he found out that I played the piano, and he would ask, well, what kind of music do you like? And I said, well, I like Scott Joplin, and I like Jelly Roll Morton. He says, you like all that black music. Now remember, he is a black man. He said, you like all that black music. What do you know about Bach? And I said, I don't know anything about Bach. And so the very next day, he came with an LP of Bach organ works, and he said, go listen to this. And so I listened to it. The next day I came back up there to sell newspapers and he said, what did you think? And I said, I loved it. He said, which pieces did you like? I said, well, of course I love the Toccata and Fugue in D minor, da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da, that one. He said, but I really like and I probably mispronounced it, but it's Passacaglia and Fugue in C minor. I just read it, I didn't know how to say it. And he said, that's great. The next day, he came back with a pile of music. I still have this music to this day. It's not here with us today, but I have it. And it was Hannon the Virtuoso Pianist. And he said, play through this. And it'll make your fingers like little hammers. It'll even out your touch and all these things. And here's a Bach book that I got for you. And he said, but this is a little hard. Here's Clementi's Sonatinas. And I looked at it and I said, I could play this in my sleep. And he said, no, give me your phone number. And so he called me that night at home, and I played through these things for him. And he says, that's not you. Who's playing that? I said, it's me. I'm playing this. I understand how this all works. And he started crying. And then he showed up one day, and he had been probably watching someone's house and took me to the house and put a piece of music in front of me and said, play this. And I was able to play it, and he started crying again. And so Joe, whatever his last name was probably the closest thing I had to a teacher, because he simply provided me with this material and a sound of something. I knew what it was supposed to sound like, and I was able to use that same thing to connect with those little black dots.
Right, so that's your first important teacher.
That is my only teacher.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And is that, I think you said 8th grade, so junior high?
Yeah.
And then
Went to Reisenstein Middle School at that point.
okay, and then to
Alderdice?
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, and I was at Alderdice for a while and started playing for the musicals. I started doing shows at the JCC when it was right over here in Belfield, and mostly just to meet girls, honestly. And, you know, the thing was, all this music that I loved, I was unable to connect with people with it. You know, I kept making all of these discoveries of music that I really loved. Like first I said it was Scott Joplin, and then I started really reading into all of the history of this music. I found they all played ragtime. I found all these books. I started to idolize all of these people. I would buy records. I remember one record I bought, because remember, I grew up in, it was kind of a tough neighborhood, and it was a rough time. Like I would get beaten up, you know, fights every single day. First they started beating me up, and then my grandfather taught me how to fight dirty. And then it became like competitive fighting all the time. And so I'm reading these books and I'm trying to connect Pittsburgh to all this music I'm falling in love with, and there's nothing. There's no mention of any of it in anything. But my dad, after one day of getting kind of attacked by a gang, went to National Record Mart and got an album by the New Orleans Ragtime Orchestra.
Knowing that you like that kind of music.
Knows that I love that music, and he brought it home for me. And the New Orleans Ragtime Orchestra was started by two guys from Sweden.
Okay.
They fell in love with this music. They moved to New Orleans. They discovered all these orchestrations at Tulane University, and they started this group with a number of very famous musicians in town, reading and playing these orchestrations. And I was just so enamored, and I was so inspired by these two Swedish guys that had left Sweden, moved to New Orleans, and started playing music and developed these international careers.
Were they, you know, contemporary at that time? Were they from
They were contemporary. They were there.
I mean, they weren't from an earlier era.
They were not. They were at that time. And the beautiful thing is, when I finally moved to New Orleans, I got to play with them all the time. And now Orange Kellen, who is one of my heroes from when I was a child, is one of my dearest friends. But that's further on down the road here.
Right, so, okay, you go to Alderdice, and then I think you went to Duquesne for a while.
I did.
And is that like the normal progression after high school? You went to Duquesne?
It should
and
be.
You studied music?
I did, but I didn't want to go. I wanted to move to New Orleans and learn how to play the New Orleans things. And when I went to Duquesne, it was just like they didn't accept me as a piano major.
Because you didn't know how to read music?
Oh, I knew how to read music. I could sight read anything. It's because I hadn't taken lessons with anyone. And they didn't accept me as a piano major. And they took me as a trumpet major. Yeah, I played the trumpet too. I did do a recording session on trumpet in New York.
And so that was something that you played in high school?
Yeah.
The trumpet?
Yeah.
Like the marching band?
Yeah, and the concert band and things like that, and the all-city band and orchestra. I was pretty good at it. And again, it was just kind of like all this stuff that I really loved. I couldn't really connect with anyone.
Okay.
And it was very frustrating that I have all this music that I love and all this stuff that I, you know, like, oh my God, I love Jelly Roll Morton. I love Harlem Stride piano. I love all the New Orleans stuff. I love all these guys, and there's like no one to talk with about this. And it was kind of frustrating. It was not a happy time.
So you actually graduated from Duquesne?
I graduated from Duquesne, attempted to be a music teacher, and I loved the kids. I taught at Shenley High School. I'm still friends with my students.
From Shenley High School?
From Shenley High School. And you know, we connected Facebook, and we all get, you know, it was a great connection, but it was not what I wanted to do. And I knew what I wanted to do.
Which was move to New Orleans?
Yeah. So, and I also knew that I wanted to, because there was really nowhere to play what I wanted to play here, and difficult to teach people to play what I like to play, because we're not aware of this. We're not taught music prior to the 1950s. And they don't teach it in the music schools, and people aren't aware of it. And you know, and I was so longing to connect where I was with this music I love. But in every book that I read, there was nothing. Still to this day, there is nothing. You will see that there is a lot. So what I did was Leon Redbone came through town performing. I had tried to go to New Orleans.
Can we put a date to this? Late 70s?
No, I was still in elementary school. No, I was in high school. This would have been mid-80s.
Mid-80s.
Mid-80s. Leon Redbone comes to town, and I had made a tape that I went to New Orleans for a couple of weeks and tried to connect and ran out of money and came back to Pittsburgh. And Leon Redbone comes through town, and I give a cassette to the guy that was playing drums with him. He was performing at Graffiti, I think. Which
Okay.
is now the
It's a Porsche dealer.
It's a Porsche dealer now. Everything is being erased. He came there. I was afraid to talk to him, but I wasn't afraid to talk to his drummer. And I gave him a tape. And I said, please give this to Leon. And I made the inside with him. I walked up to the drummer, who eventually ended up playing and recording with and doing all these things. I mentioned the word Jelly Roll Morton, and we started talking about Jelly Roll Morton, and it was like, oh, here's someone that I can talk with about this. So he gives the tape to Redbone. A couple months go by. My card was on it. I was no longer living at home. I was living with the girl who would become my first ex-wife. Just another fun thing, the multiple ex-wife story. And Redbone calls my mother's house, and she answers the phone. He says, I'd like to speak to Tom Roberts, please. Who is this? This is Leon Redbone. No, it's not. Who is this? I assure you, madam, I am who I say I am. No, it's not. Is this Rogie? Is this Garvin? Who is this? Madam, I wish to hire your son. Is he there? Oh, no. He lives here.
She thinks it's one of your buddies.
Playing
Yes.
a trick on her.
April Fool.
And he eventually calls me, says, I'm coming through Pittsburgh again. I'm going to be playing at Graffiti. I'd like to hire you for that event. So I did that event with him at Graffiti. And the show was great, and I met some great guys that were in the band who eventually I got connected with later on as well. And he had asked me where I was going to be playing, and I told the audience I'll be playing at the balcony. And he says, "Isn't there room for you at the veranda?" And then when we got off stage, he made a comment about that, and I said, "Yeah, I didn't have the balls to say that." And he said, $50. I went, "What?" And then Dan Levinson, the clarinetist, said, "You're in." So what do you mean? He says, Leon hates profanity. He does not like, there's lots of things that you could get fined for in front of Leon. Profanity was one of them, $50. And Dan knew, I didn't know, that I was in when he fined me $50 for using the impolite word for testicles.
Wow.
And so a couple months go by, his manager, who is his wife, calls me and says, "We'd like to hire you for 8 weeks on the road. The first job is The Tonight Show." So I fly out to Los Angeles, they pick me up. The first thing I did was The Tonight Show.
The first thing you did was a graffiti.
Well, that's the first thing I did outside of here.
All right.
Was The Tonight Show. This is on YouTube. You can Google Leon Redbone with Tom Roberts, The Tonight Show. And the beautiful, there I am, I'm there in Hollywood.
But I think your back is to the camera.
Because I didn't feel, this is kind of, see, the person that's talking to you now is not the person then.
Okay.
I honestly didn't feel worthy to look at the camera.
Oh, so it was your decision to face away.
And I didn't want to look at the camera.
Okay. No, I
was
understand
afraid.
that.
I know. I just, because of the way things had been set up for me, I didn't feel like I deserved to look at the camera. And, but what happened? So that's on YouTube. Leon Redbone with Tom Roberts, Tonight Show. You can all see it. It's wonderful. And but the thing that happened was one of the guys in the band was from New Orleans. Scott Black was his name. And everybody in New Orleans was tuning in to see Scott Black. And then they saw this little mill hunky playing the piano. And when I get back to the hotel room there in Hollywood, there's offers from all these band leaders in New Orleans.
So
I'm going to start crying now. This is very profound stuff that this happened, but Leon made this happen. Not him personally, but Leon is a big force throughout my existence.
No, getting ready for this today forced me to look up the first time I saw Leon Redbone.
And where was that?
It was on Saturday Night Live.
I saw that too.
It was May 26th, 1996, I think. It was the 22nd episode of Saturday Night Live.
That would have been 76.
76, I'm sorry, I said 96.
Yeah.
It's 76, yes. I was in New York, probably looking for a job. I would have been recently graduated from college, and one of my roommates in college had been an early fan of Saturday Night Live, and he said, "Oh, you can go see it live in New York City." And so I went and I stood in line.
Live.
I saw him live. Elliot Gould was the host that
Yes.
night. It was the 22nd episode, and I don't know that I had heard Leon Redbone, but I instantly loved him.
I know, me too. I saw that on TV.
Yeah, and it was just, it was such an unusual sound. But
I know.
I want to know, can you remember enough the cassette that what was it about the way you played the piano that might have made him say, "Oh, this is the real thing"? Do you have any idea?
I know, there's Jelly Roll Morton on it, there was Fats Waller on it, there was all the James P. Johnson, I improvised a little bit on some blues for it, I played some ragtime stuff. It's just the stuff that I made to give to someone in New Orleans to let them know I knew what I was doing, and I ran out of money. So I gave it to John Gill, who gave it to Leon, and that's what he connected with. He actually said, "I have been looking for this tape for several months. Mr. Gill, what have you done with my cassette tape?" And he had been looking. He wanted to call me right after he got it, but he lost it, which is not too surprising.
Not out of character.
Well, the van was also filled with like thousands of keys from hotel rooms where you would stay. Back in the day, you would have a hotel room key to go in. And at the end of every show, inadvertently, someone would have forgotten to return their keys, so they'd throw it on the dashboard of the van. And there were thousands of keys from thousands of hotels everywhere within this van. So people saw me on the Tonight. So you were talking about the first time you saw Leon Redbone. I saw that too. When I first saw that, I was like, "Oh, what is this?
Right.
Who is this person?"
But I mean, I was so surprised that, and just with the minimal amount of research, I mean, that's what happens now. The internet lets you know everything. He sang, I think, My Walking Stick.
Without my walking stick. And it was probably with Jonathan Dorn on tuba.
Oh, which means Joel Dorn's son?
Joel Dorn's brother.
Brother. I knew as a early music fan that if I ever saw produced by Joel Dorn,
It's going to be good.
it's going to be good, yes.
be good,
And that was the
yeah.
only producer that I saw like that, but so many of my favorite records said produced by Joel Dorn.
Mine too.
So,
See, this is why we like each other.
maybe so, who knows? So you start to tour with, they hired you for 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Been extended beyond that.
Well, no. So the first show was the Tonight Show. Then we just toured all through California.
Oh, okay.
We were all through California and
Playing small clubs?
playing huge clubs.
Not the Hollywood Bowl.
No, but the Roxy.
Okay.
And like in these things, like I'm meeting people like, the guy from the Monkees, the drummer.
Mickey Dolenz?
Mickey Dolenz was there. I can't remember all of the
All these people that had just encountered.
They were all coming
Leon
to hear
Redbone.
Leon, and there's a photo of me. I should have brought it from the Hollywood Reporter of all these people that were there at the Roxy to hear us do that show. And it was just amazing to connect with all the, so we do.
So
So
you make it.
So there were some small clubs too. There was we played in a converted barn at one point too.
I'm interested to know, like, you say you flew to LA and the next thing you know, you were on The Tonight Show. But I mean, did you have rehearsal time with them? Were you playing everything by ear? I mean, did you know all the songs?
Leon did not like to rehearse, and that was the key. He did not want to rehearse. We did rehearse one day for a show, and then when the show started, nothing was the same. Leon wanted to do everything spontaneously because he realized the excitement was there. The excitement was started by him doing what he needed to do, and he hired people that were capable of listening to what he was doing in that moment and reacting to that one moment and accompanying him and occasionally commenting upon what he did in that moment. It was the most amazing musical education I have ever received.
I mean, I think of him principally as a vocalist.
And guitarist. Oh my God, was he an incredible guitarist. And he's even better than you think he is. Because we would be sitting, this was years later when I got back with him, and he'd be sitting there in a dressing room saying, oh, this is how Reverend Gary Davis would do this. And he'd play, I was like, oh my God, you sound like Reverend Gary Davis. This is how Mississippi John Hurt would do it. And he'd play the same thing like Mississippi John Hurt. This is how Charlie Patton would do it. And he studied all of those great Mississippi Delta and Piedmont blues guitarists and knew what they were doing and then would incorporate it into what he did at that moment to accompany himself.
Cool. So you say after the 8 weeks, what happens?
I come back home, I'm a little depressed, but then I said, that's it. I'm going to audition for these bands in New Orleans. I had just gotten married, first ex-wife, my favorite ex-wife. And we went down to New Orleans and did an audition and found a place to live, and that was it. Moved to New Orleans, lived in the Garden District, was playing with Jacques Gauthé in his Creole Rice Jazz Band. And there's lots of videos with me and Jacques Gauthé on YouTube now, too.
Jacques Gauthé.
Jacques Gauthé.
Gauthé.
Gauthé. G-A-U-T-H-E with that little weird French thing over
Accent
the top.
aigu.
Watch your language. This is a family show, Rick. And so we were playing at the Hotel Meridian 6 nights a week.
Wow.
And my dream had come true. And then I met other musicians and started playing in other clubs. And then I got to play with Orange Kellen from the New Orleans Ragtime Orchestra. I got to meet all my heroes and play with my heroes. And not only play with them, not one time, work with them, become a colleague with those people that I had idolized.
Was your dad still alive at that point?
He was
Did you
still
say,
alive.
remember that record you bought me? I'm playing with those guys now.
I probably did.
And how long do you stay in New Orleans?
I was there for like 5 years, and that was I made a mistake to leave New Orleans. That was ex-wife number 2.
So you moved back to Pittsburgh?
No, I moved to Annapolis. I was living in Annapolis and had a beautiful home right on the Chesapeake Bay. I could walk out my door, walk 100 feet to the right with my Dalmatian, who I named Bix Biterbark.
Okay.
And we would cavort in the Chesapeake Bay. And Leon Redbone, again, Leon Redbone found out I was living on the East Coast, and he contacted me and said, we're going out on tour again. Can you come meet me? And this is when I drove up to New Hope, where he was living, and stayed with him. Drove up to Chan's in Rhode Island and did the first show with him in the second part of my career. And there was something really profound that happened. Can I share this with you? Because I think this is the one. So we're driving up there. It's just he and I in the show. There is a Chinese restaurant in Woonsocket, Rhode Island called Chan's. And it's not a Chinese restaurant. It's like a nightclub. It's a big, opulent nightclub that has lots of people playing there all the time.
C-H-A-N-S.
Yes.
Okay.
And as we're driving up there, and he's driving, and I want to ask him a question. And I said, Leon, there's a question I've wanted to ask you for years. And you could just see him. And I said, no, not that. You had played a recording of Blind Boone piano rolls on that first tour I did with you. And you just see him relax. Totally relaxed. Were those really Blind Boone piano rolls? Oh yeah, quite. Blind Boone made a series of recordings, a bunch of piano rolls. They're quite wonderful, blah, blah, blah. And we'd just talk about that. That was my serious question for him. I could care less about what his real name was, what his real identity was. That was his mystique, was who the hell was this guy? Where did this guy come from? That's exactly what I thought. Who is this person? And I didn't ask him that, even though I knew.
You already knew that in advance.
We all knew this stuff. And we did the show. It was great.
Just you and him.
Just me and him. We did a lot of tours. It was just me and him. And I learned a lot about music by just doing those things with him. And
I've never heard of Blind Boone, so I don't know. Is that someone?
Blind Boone was a blind piano virtuoso from the 1890s who was an absolute genius. He's from Missouri. Was another African American, and was a huge concert artist. Would play classical music and had all of these amazing pieces that he could play. And it's proto-ragtime. We hear a lot of the roots of ragtime and jazz music in the things that he was doing around the turn of the 1890s.
And the way you recorded then was to make a piano roll.
He made a piano roll, which is probably the best way to make a recording. Pianos produced too many overtones. It was very difficult to record a piano with the technology that was available at that time. And piano rolls were the ways of doing it. Because
I think we have Gershwin piano rolls.
Of course we have Gershwin piano rolls. We have Scott Joplin piano rolls and all these. Gershwin was able to record. Gershwin is late enough that he's able to make physical records. I have most of them. I've got the first recording of Rhapsody in Blue.
Okay.
Yeah. It's all up there in Spring Hill, but that's all part of the Hot Club of Pittsburgh. We'll talk about that later.
Yes.
So, but Blind Boone was this great blind pianist who would tour around the world, and people were just enamored by him. There's photographs of him sitting at a railway station, surrounded by hundreds of people because they were so just enamored of what he could do. There was another blind pianist at the time. His name was Blind Tom, who was very much a special needs person who had been trained to play, and he had this amazing ability, as most autistic people do, to hear something and be able to play it back. And there were like battles of music between these two blind black piano players that thousands of people would come to hear. It was amazing stuff. So I asked him, were those really Blind Boone piano rolls? And he relaxes. And at that point, we're driving back to New Hope. And I knew something was happening. I'm getting chills right now even remembering this. I knew something was happening. Roberts, what do you think of this? There was a cassette in the van. And he puts in this cassette. What do you think of this? And it's John McCormick, the great Irish tenor.
Irish tenor, yeah.
And it turns out it's his very last recording session, singing, and this really connects with us here. I Dream of Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair.
Stephen Foster.
Stephen Foster. And I listen to it, and I'm embarrassed when I hear it. And I start thinking, he's playing this for me, even though I'm not the person that I am right now who's aware of things. I was aware of some things at that point. He's playing this for me because it's important to him, and there's something in this that I need to be aware of. And why am I embarrassed by this? Why am I embarrassed by this?
You mean at the moment, in the car?
At that moment, I was embarrassed by what I was hearing. And it ended, and I said, and he said, what do you think? I said, may I hear it again, please? And he played it again. He actually had a cassette that had I Dream of Jeannie sung by John McCormick over and over again for 90 minutes.
Okay.
That's what it was. So we listened to it again. And as I listened to it, I realized why I was feeling embarrassed was it is the most pure utterance of emotion. I felt like I was going to cry. I feel like I'm going to cry right now just remembering this moment. When I play this record for people whose hearts are open, who do not have the facade of what they think they are supposed to be as a grown-up, that are in, I think you would have this because I sense this about you. They weep because it is so emotionally pure. And I think that was his test to see if I was going to be with him for the next few years.
And you passed.
Of course I did, because I was so moved by it all. I sought out that record. I finally own that 78 right now, which is the closest thing for you to actually be with him in that room. Those 78s are the closest thing. There's one step. There's only one step between you and that performer. There's no editing. There's no going to digital. There's no going to a tape. The needle goes into the groove and that person sings or plays, and that moment is captured within those grooves.
There's no multi-tracking. It's just pure.
It's like an insect trapped in amber.
And what's playing with John McCormick?
Just a piano.
Just a piano.
And the pianist is playing the exact thing that Stephen Foster wrote. And it's the most moving thing you've ever heard in your life. So that was the second moment that I got back in with him. To go back to the car bomb thing now, to bring it all back, after the bomb went off in the Allegheny Mountain Tunnel, yes, it was tied in with the odometer.
Oh.
Yes, I thought I was going to die at that moment. I'm driving, I hear a sound. I think that's like my tire. I think it's the transmission. I think it's the car next to me. And I get into the tunnel, and the odometer switches to 00. Boom. Boom.
An explosion.
There was an explosion. And I looked in the rear view mirror. This is great. All right, I'm going into this now. I said it was a different time. And I looked in the rear view mirror to see how close the truck was behind me, and I couldn't see the truck because all I could see was orange. And I realized, oh my God, I'm on fire.
The car's on fire.
And I'm in a tunnel. This is how I die.
But you didn't.
I didn't. So wait, let me go through the whole thing since we got into this. This is a great story. And I think, oh my God, this is how I'm going to die. And so after I didn't die, I call Redbone, and his entire family gets on the phone. Like his two daughters are on two different phones listening. His wife is on another phone. He's on one phone. His cleaning lady is on another phone. They're all listening to this story as I tell them this. And when I say the car blew up, I said, you know, you can buy those kits at Walmart.
To make a car bomb?
Yeah. You can't, but it was him being Leon.
Okay.
And then I go through the story, and I said, and I see the end of the tunnel. I think, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to burn up. I have a chance.
There's light.
There's light. There's the literal light at the end of the tunnel. And I step on the brakes. No brakes. And I go to turn the steering wheel. No steering wheel. At this point, Leon says, oh, she spared no expense. She got the deluxe kit. Well done. Name who shall not be mentioned.
But you immediately thought you knew who had caused this to happen.
Oh, of course I did. But this is lawsuits that would happen. So we're not going to talk about this. But what's in the car, and the reason why I was heading this way was one of the people that, remember when I was trying to connect Pittsburgh to the things that I loved, but I couldn't find anyone? The closest I could find was a guy named Lucky Roberts. And Lucky Roberts was from Philadelphia, and I figured this is the closest I can do. Let's back up a little bit. We're with Leon. We're traveling through the mountains of Colorado, and we're trying to entertain each other. It's me, Dan Levinson, the clarinetist, and Redbone. And we're coming up with all these hysterical little things like Sting sings Bing. Like contemporary people doing old-time music.
I'd listen to that.
It'd be great, I think. Wynton plays Wilton. Wynton Marsalis plays the music of Wilton Crawley, clarinetist and contortionist. Come over. We'll listen to him. It was another guy that Leon was obsessed with. Leon would end shows by saying, "This is a number by Wilton Crawley, clarinetist and contortionist." Big time woman. You've probably heard him sing that on SNL and all those other things. He said, "If any of Wilton's descendants happen to be in the audience this evening, come see me immediately," preceding the show. Wynton plays Wilton. And then Redbone chimes in, "Roberts plays Roberts." And I think, Marcus Roberts plays Lucky Roberts? No!
Tom Roberts plays Lucky
Tom
Roberts.
Roberts plays Lucky Roberts. And I said, that's not funny, and that's kind of mean. It's not meant to be funny. It's not meant to be mean. It's your new project. I said, it's impossible. Exactly. Do it. So Lucky Roberts was this piano player from Philadelphia, very mysterious, made a few recordings, never knew why he didn't make so many recordings. Eventually I would find out. And his stuff was impossible. He had giant hands and he would play things that were so insanely impossible that no one could do it. It also turned out he was the guy that taught George Gershwin. Because when George Gershwin was 14 years old, he was selling sheet music at Remix, just like demonstrating music. And at that moment, the two major lights in black theater, Bert Williams, who was the star of the Ziegfeld Follies. We need to remember Bert Williams was a star of the Ziegfeld Follies. And Will Votery, who was Flo Ziegfeld's music director, both African Americans in a major position, saw him at Remix and just said, "You have great potential. You need to go study with Lucky Roberts." And so they would bring George Gershwin up to Lucky Roberts in Harlem, and Lucky taught him how to play. And so when you listen to the piano rolls of George Gershwin, when you listen to the recordings of George Gershwin, as the eminent historian and writer Joan Pizer said, I got to know Joan Pizer too, Gershwin live was mesmerizing, a tall, white Lucky Roberts. Amazingly impossible stuff. So I spent the next 3 years after that moment with a little Marantz tape deck that could slow things down an octave. I should have brought these to show you. And I wrote out by hand everything that Lucky Roberts played.
Lucky Roberts at this point is passed away.
He died in 1968.
You never met him?
I never met him.
Your Uncle Lucky.
There's more to it. You'll see. And this gets great. This is going to be a 3-part thing. So I spent 3 years, I transcribed all of this Lucky Roberts music. And I was looking for a studio to record it in. I don't have the CD anymore. I just found it on eBay last night and I bought it again. I heard these CDs that Johnny Costa recorded. And he recorded them in the North Side, on a piano in a studio in the North Side. And I loved the sound of that piano. And so when I finished this project, I called the producer and I said, I want to record it at this studio. And so I was able to record at, I think it was called Audiomation at that time, right on North Avenue, while I recorded these things. And I started walking around the North Side while this recording session was taking place during the break. And I said, oh my God, this is so beautiful. I had no idea the North Side is so beautiful. Growing up in the East End, you think it's going to be awful. And I walk around, I say, oh my God, this is so beautiful. So, do all the recordings here, go back to Annapolis where the problems are still happening. And I'm coming back to Pittsburgh to finish the edits on that album when the car bomb goes off.
And the recordings are in the back.
And all of the handwritten manuscripts are sitting in the back of the car. And the seat is down. And they're between the seats. And the car is in flames. And I jump in. The bomb kept going off.
You've gotten out of, there's no brakes, there's no draw.
I knew how to stop the car because a little voice just said, emergency brake. And I pulled the emergency brake and the car went off to the side.
In the tunnel, outside the tunnel.
Outside the tunnel. I'm not stupid enough to stop the car in the tunnel. I knew there was a car behind, big truck behind me that would have definitely killed me for sure. Stopped, pulled off to the side. You can still look on the side of the Allegheny Mountain tunnels. There is a burned patch from where the car burned to the ground. Everything melted. So I realized I'm jumping. I'm getting
But your
things
transcriptions, they're gone too.
No, they're sitting in the back of the car. This is the great part. And they're underneath the seat. The seat is down and they're underneath there. And I realized, oh my God, all of these transcriptions are in the back of the car. And I jump into the car and there's flames pouring in through the air conditioning vents, black smoke billowing, just awful, toxic, horrible thing. And I get in there and I can't get them. And then I move back and I pull the seat back and I grab the transcriptions as all the flames pour into the cab of the car. And I grab them and I jump out of the car and the whole thing goes up in flame. I saved them.
Wow, and you still have them.
I still have them. But that stuff is what led to the next level of my career.
Excellent. Well, we're going to take a break there because how do we top that?
How do you top that? There's a lot you can top it with.
All right.
Break.
A quick break, and we'll come back for more with Tom Roberts.
Yes.
This Gumbands podcast is made possible by the Buell Foundation, serving southwestern Pennsylvania since 1927, and by listeners like you. Thank you.